Welcome to week 3 of Decoding Art. I'm Barry McGrill, your instructor, and this little video is meant to get us sort of started for our Zoom session. This week we're looking at the Age of Enlightenment and the Impressionists. So after the Age of Enlightenment, which happens around the 17th, 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment, or what we call, Big E Enlightenment, is this moment when people started to stand up for individual rights and against divine right rulership and kind of against autocracy, and it's the sort of the building blocks of modern democracy, I guess. Artists began to see that the content of their artwork carried social and political messages. This idea demonstrably changed the content or subject matter we find in paintings, for instance. Hidden or secret messages seem to be placed in artworks to be decoded by the astute and the like-minded viewer. For instance, Goya's painting called The 3rd of May, 1808 is just such a painting. It commemorates a moment of the Spanish resistance to Napoleon's occupation, and it particularly depicts the execution by firing squad of resistance fighters. It was painted in 1814, so several years after the event, but it depicts a real event that we're dealing with in art as reportage, right? Like as reporting of a fact. But of course, the fact is seen through the lens of the Spanish resistance, not the French propagandists who would have seen things completely differently. One person's resistance fighter is another person's terrorist. How do we know this? Simply by looking at the image. Because the resistance fighters are shown as sympathetic figures. The focal point is the man in the white shirt about to be shot. He throws up his hands in a dramatic gesture. He's surrounded by compatriots who've already been executed. But it's also, his pose is also one that creates a connection with Christ on the cross, with his hands thrown up as they are and the white shirt that he's wearing open, pulled open to reveal his chest. Look at the soldiers. How are they depicted? They're shown from an angle that hides their faces, making them appear to be a part of a mob, unaccountable. A visual form of injustice, really, in this painting. In fact, the scene takes place at night, that is, under the cover of darkness, so the unidentifiable soldiers and their dirty work can't be discovered. But of course, Goya knows about this. It was widely known in the town outside of which it happened, and he, years later, bravely depicts this. In the distance, we can see, barely made out, the town, and the tower that is probably belonging to the church, noting that this is all happening in sight of God, who does nothing to stop it. In this painting, making a statement about the loss of the divine right of rulership coinciding with the loss of belief in the divine, if bad things are allowed to happen to innocent people, is kind of interesting. So then we can look at the painterly style of the artist Goya. He is well into his mature phase of his career at this point, willing to take some chances with the application of paint. The bodies are simple, almost cartoons. He forgoes the realistic application of skin tones and instead scumbles the paint, sort of scribbling, as though he is just almost haphazardly moving his brush across the canvas. This creates a kind of immediacy and intensity that we don't find with works of fine painterly finish. But he also does another thing, something that the painter Paul Cézanne would pick up generations later. Goya puts a thick and hard black outline around the figures and almost everything else too. And a hard black outline has the effect of flattening out the painted subject. This idea of flattening out a painted subject becomes a mainstay of the modern movement, especially signaling that the painting realizes what it is, an artistic rendering rather than a simulation or reflection of the real world. Instead, it is the representation of an idea. And in the 3rd of May, 1808, that idea, I think, is sacrifice.